Hi everyone, so it's Big Lee again, and at the weekend I posted a video that told you about different types of electronic game that we were trying so that I could continue to play some games while we're all socially distancing. So I mentioned the fact that I was using Discord to join up with some old buddies to do a D&D game remotely, and that worked out really well. In fact, we're going to play another game later in the week. I also mentioned that we were using email so that Richard could run a game for us, for me and Ray, and again that seems to be going really well. Looking forward to the next instalment of that. And the third method that I mentioned was that we were going to try and use some means to play a game of Water Tanker over the internet. Now we tested out a couple of different packages that we tried, Google Hangouts and Zoom. Now some of us are more familiar with Zoom because we used it in work. I've not used Hangouts much before, but we tested the two out, and actually in the end we decided to go with Zoom. It just seemed to work a little bit better, the image quality was a little bit better, and we were all just that little bit more familiar with it. The main downside with Zoom is that meetings are limited to 45 minutes if you don't pay a subscription. But on the night we were able to restart the meeting very easily, and we didn't lose anyone, so obviously it worked, it did its job. Now in terms of the rules, there were some changes that needed to be made in order for us to be able to play the game, because I was going to have to do most of the admin, if you like. I was going to be rolling all the dice and looking after the tank dashboards. Plus some of my players have never played Water Tanker before, so there was a double learning curve there. Not only this strange way of playing the game, but also not so familiar with the rules. So what I ended up doing was I decided to make some key changes to the rules that would make things a little bit easier given the setup we were going to use. And the main one I did was I took, normally when you play Water Tanker, each tank has 6 command dice and you roll them at the beginning of every turn to determine what that tank can do. But what I chose to do was give all of the tanks a predetermined set of dice. So what I did was I assumed from the start that all tanks would reload automatically at the end of the turn. So that meant the number 5 dice I didn't need to use, and I gave every tank a move dice, an acquire dice, an aim dice and a shoot dice, and then, as I've said, I didn't bother with a reload dice and the 6 dice as a wild card. So what they ended up with was a 1, 2, 3 and 4 and 2 wild cards. Now while that isn't as random as a normal roll, when you'd roll all 6 dice, what it did mean was that it simplified play. I didn't have to roll dice for 4 different tanks every single turn, but they still had a lot of tactical decisions to make. So for instance, they could use those wildcard dice to repair damage, or go a little bit faster, or improve their aim, or acquire a target. Or I also allowed them to use those 2 wildcard dice to reload and aim and fire a second time in a turn, and that did happen a couple of times. But the point is the players had plenty of decisions what to do with those wildcard dice and how to organise their tank for each turn, and it seemed to work pretty well. Everyone quickly slipped into understanding how that worked and everything, and the gameplay went very well with minimal constant explanation. I did 10 minutes at the beginning to say I was going to do it, and everything ran quite well after that. As already indicated, I'd said that we weren't going to have reloads. We were going to automatically assume we reloaded, except unless you're using your 2 wild cards for a second attack in a turn. The other thing we changed was I got rid of the rule about buttoning up, where the tanks were considered to be buttoned up for the entire game. It just made it easier. It was one less thing for us to worry about, particularly as I was going to be controlling all 4 tanks for them. Now the dice rolling, they obviously couldn't roll the dice themselves, so what I did is I got a dice tray and I would roll the dice but hold it up to camera lens so that they could see what was going on. The main downside obviously with shooting a game like that using a camera at an elevated angle is they get only the wide view of the table. But because I was using my mobile phone as the main camera, up on a tripod, up in the air to give an elevated view, I was able to take it out of that fixing occasionally and take them down to table height so they could see what their tank could see, or at least get a close-up of certain areas. I also used things like a laser pointer to help show lines of sight, because it was very clear, even when they had a wide view of the table, what they could see. Excuse me. And overall, I think play went very well. In fact, it went so well we managed to get 2 games in during the course of the evening. So I'm going to cut now to a short piece of video that I shot on the evening, not during play, but just beforehand, show you the setup of the table and so on. And then when I've showed you that, I'll come back and I'll tell you a little bit more about how the whole evening went. So in a few minutes' time, everyone's going to start dialing in to join in the meeting. We're using Zoom so that we can play a game of What a Tanker, and I've set it up so that we're going to do a desert game. I'm going to do most of the dice rolling, so hence I have a tray that I can hold up to the camera so people can see, and I've tried to simplify the rules a little bit, which I've already discussed. So this is my setup. As I say, in about 10 minutes time people are going to start joining the meeting, and first thing I'm going to do is just briefly go over rules changes, what I've done to simplify the game so that we can crack on and play as quickly as possible. So see me after the game and I'll tell you whether it was a success or not. So this is a basic setup, a nice simple crossroads. Tried to keep the battlefield fairly even on both sides, so you got the same number of hills all meeting around a town by a crossroads. A few palm trees and a few low walls, a little bit of low terrain. The idea being there's plenty of places for tanks to sneak around where they can't be seen or to gain some cover. So we'll be starting in about another 5 or 10 minutes time, and I'll just give you a quick bypass over the field so you can see some of the detail. So there you go, some M1340 Italian tanks running down the road, kicking up a load of dust. And then down the other end of the road, a couple of Valentines. Nice and simple. Both lots of tanks on either side are level 2 tanks in the What a Tanker rules. So basically it's the first 4 players to dial into the meeting will get a tank. So there you have it. The game went fairly well, I think. Most of the players seem to have a good understanding of the rules relatively quickly, and gameplay progressed quite nice and easy and fast. In fact, we was able to get 2 games in during the course of 2.5 hours, which I think was pretty good considering we were doing the game remotely. A few small changes I would make. I didn't mention this in the introduction. The way I was dealing with damage was that damage would be either temporary or permanent, and I weren't worrying about the damage chart that says, say for instance, the tank can move slower or the turret can't move or whatever. It's just an added complication that made it a little bit harder for me to run the game remotely like that. So what I did was, if it was a temporary dice, I'd take them off and they could be repaired using the wildcards, and obviously if it was permanent dice, those dice came off completely. When I was determining which dice came off, I was first concentrating on those 4 dice that I'd given them at the beginning, the drive, the acquire, the aim and the shoot. So I would roll 1d4 to determine which of those dice came off, whether it was temporary or permanent damage, and they could then use their wildcards to fill in any gaps in the command line or to repair temporary damage and so on. That worked okay, but when they suffered multiple damage, so maybe 2 command dice had to come off, I should really have rolled 2 d4s rather than 1 d4, just to speed things up a little bit. But otherwise I think it worked pretty well. Like I say, feedback from the guys was pretty good, and I think we might try that again. We're going to see if we can get one of the other players, one of the other members of the Rejics to run a game remotely, and we'll probably use Zoom again. But all told, I think it went very well indeed. Now there's more details and a few more photos available on my blog, which will go up online in a minute. By all means, please pop over, leave some comments, or leave comments here on YouTube as usual, and please subscribe. The button will be somewhere up in the corner over here any second now. Thank you for viewing, and thank you all for the positive comments that I've had so far. I'll keep trying to do some more. If you've got any suggestions for videos, please let me know, because I'll be more than happy to try and do something specific if anyone has any particular requests. But anyway, in the meantime, I'll sign off as usual by just saying that I hope you're all well and your families are well. Stay safe, people. See you next time. Bye.